This is Kathy from Gadget Stop 321, and in today's video I'm going to be taking a look at Lamy Peridot. This is not exactly the color that I think of when I think of a peridot. My daughter's birthstone is a peridot. It's the birthstone for August, and she was given this little knick-knack. It's got a little peridot in it. This is the color that I think of when I think of a peridot. Later, we'll take a look at some of the green inks from my collection. I'll also be doing a writing sample on Tomoe River 52 GSM paper, and I'll take a look at some writing samples that I did on copy paper and in my Leuchtturm. I'll also take a look at the results of my water resistance test. Writing with Lamy Peridot using a glass dip nib was pleasant. It came off the nib nice and uniformly. The ink swatch that I did with tweezers started out nice and crisp, but it had a little trouble holding on to the paper for the entire swatch. On the little drip at the end of the swatch, there doesn't appear to be any sheen, but there is a halo of darker ink. Now this ink does look like there could be some nice shading, some subtle shading. It tends to range from fairly dark to medium dark in the swatch. I'm going to begin with a Faber-Castell Ambition with an extra fine stainless steel nib. Okay, there's some feedback, but just some subtle feedback here. I'm going to say this is nice. It feels like a pencil on paper. Next, I've got a Lamy logo that I have installed my 14 karat extra fine Lamy nib on. This nib is really soft, and I've had questions about this. People ask, is just the gold colored section the gold part and the rest of it steel? No, this is an entirely 14 karat gold nib. It's just it's been rhodium plated on everything except for the nib slit, and it's very soft and bouncy, and I write with a very light hand with this nib, and so this is very smooth. Next, I've got my Lamy CP1, and I've got a stainless steel fine nib on it. Now this stainless steel nib is quite a bit drier than the gold nib, and I found that I prefer this steel fine nib on poor quality paper. It's nice and smooth. On nice fountain pen friendly paper, I just find it to feel kind of generic and unspectacular. I'm gonna put that I guess it feels nice enough to write with. It's just that this gold nib spoils me. And this particular nib does feel much nicer on like the copy paper. Next, I've got my Sailor 1911 Standard that has a 14 karat medium nib. There is lots of audible feedback with this nib, and it feels very similar. The type of feedback that it has is very similar to the Faber-Castell Ambition. It's got a pencil-y type of feedback, and I'm going to say, if you like feedback, I'm going to say it's okay, because it's I think there's actually a little more feedback. Let me see here. You can really hear it on the paper. Let me check the Faber-Castell one more time. Oh yeah, the Sailor has much more feedback. The Sailor Medium has more feedback than the Faber-Castell Extra Fine. So I'm just going to say that one's okay. Next I've got a Kaweco Perkeo with a stainless steel medium nib. Now the Perkeo sounds a lot like the Sailor did. There's a lot of audible feedback, but it's just a little bit smoother. And so I'm going to say this one was nice. Next I've got a Pilot Plumix with a cursive medium stainless steel nib. All right, this was smooth. And finally, I've got a Jinhao X750 with a 1.5 stainless steel stub nib. The ink flow is a little bit dry in this nib, but you can't tell when you're writing with it. I've noticed this on other papers as well. It feels very smooth. And I wouldn't call it a glassy smoothness, but I would call it a silky smoothness. Very enjoyable to write with in this nib. While that dries, I'm going to take a look at the writing sample that I did on 20-pound copy paper. I noticed that a lot of the inks felt dry. A lot of feedback. The pen that really stood out, I mentioned earlier, was the Lamy CP1. It's a dry writer, and the reverse writing, I made a note, was scratchy, but that fine nib was just very pleasant. It really stood out among all the other pens. It was enjoyable to use. And in the wetter nibs, like the Lamy logo that I had the gold nib in, it was pleasant enough to write with, but it just felt a little too wet, and you started to see some feathering. And you can see when you compare it to the CP1, the lines look a little cleaner in the CP1. And in the wetter nibs, not much feathering. The letters look a little ragged, but, and like I mentioned, the stub nib was writing kind of dry. The bleed through is not bad at all, even on the stub nib. Now the stub nib in this case with this ink was a little bit drier of a writer, but I can tell that's the Sailor medium nib right there, and that looks like the Lamy Extra Fine. That's not bad at all. Yeah, and the CP1, I just see one little area, or a couple little areas it's wanting to come through. Not bad for copy paper. I'll go ahead and show the writing sample that I did in my Leuchtturm. Again, I didn't see any sheen. There's some subtle shading, that looks nice, but I think this Peridot looks more like an emerald, which is my birthstone, but I compared it to Mont Blanc emerald, which I didn't think looked like an emerald. And they look very different. I think Lamy Peridot looks more like an actual emerald. When I was going through my ink sample cards, looking for matches for Lamy Peridot, I was kind of surprised at how similar California Teal looks. Now, California Teal, if you look at the swatch, it might be, it's a little more vibrant and it has that red sheen, but they look very similar. And Kaweco Palm Green is a little more grassy green, you can see, but I think they look very similar. I'll put those over here. Now, a couple of inks in my collection that I immediately thought of when I thought of a Peridot was Iroshizuku Chikurin and Sailor Manyo Ukikuzu, or Ukikusa. I think it's actually Ukikuzu. I may have written it wrong on there. But if I compare both of those to an actual Peridot, let's see. Chikurin maybe looks a little too yellow, but Ukikuzu I think is a good match for a Peridot. And I was kind of surprised when I did the water resistance test. There's a decent amount of gray that is left behind that gives this ink some nice water resistance, particularly look in the Sailor Medium. Very legible. And on the 52 GSM paper, a little bit of bleed through on the heavy swatch, but that's it. There's some show through, and you would expect that on this thin paper and a darker ink like this. I'm not seeing any sheen. There's some subtle shading you can see, particularly on the stub nibs. But even on the Sailor 1911 Standard, I'm seeing just some nice subtle shading. The Lamy CP1 was a little bit drier, so you get a little less of the darker tones. On the good quality paper, none of these really stood out as particularly enjoyable to write with. The ambition was nice. It was good enough. If I were writing with it, it wouldn't stand out as, I wouldn't think, oh, I wish I were writing with something else. But the Lamy CP1 did really stand out on the copy paper as being particularly pleasant. All right, Lamy Peridot is just one of those inks that the name doesn't match the color, and so it throws me off. I've had other inks like that in the past that once I got past the name and just used the ink and started thinking of it as something else. One ink that particularly stands out in my memory is the Krishna. There's a Krishna green ink that is, my sample of it is like swimming pool blue. Once I got past it not being green, using the ink itself is very nice, and it makes me think of a swimming pool. It just seems nice and refreshing. So once I get past this ink not being what I think of as Peridot, if I start thinking of it as emerald green, I may like it a little bit better. But it's not particularly pleasant to use in every nib. All right, if you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.